All right, well, good evening. We had a little bit of rain, and I was really hoping it would be raining while we were here so I could see who were the devoted members and who weren't that fell asleep. And I've actually been preaching at one of the Henderson churches, actually the Henderson Church of Christ, and I was preaching there maybe my sophomore or junior year, and I was talking at that time about Goliath and David and their battle. And while I was talking about that, the coolest point of my lesson that I thought was very powerful, it thundered outside really loud. And I was thinking, man, this is really cool. And then I started kind of getting a little, prideful about it. It was getting good. And then God brought me low because the power went out. And so everything, the only thing that I could see was, the front row. That's all I could really see. And so that stopped the lesson very quickly. But it's good to have rain. And it's also good to have sunshine. We need both. And I think Solomon even has something to say about that at the beginning of his book in Ecclesiastes chapter 1. But I want to begin by, causing you to reflect on something really quickly. There's a phrase that's used a lot with especially younger people, and was used a lot for me when I was growing up. And I don't want to sound like I'm boasting in myself, because I know there are other people here who have heard this before. You probably just say it to people, maybe just to even compliment them because you love them or you just really like them. But when I was growing up and I was younger, I got this from maybe some of my teachers and also maybe some other people outside, but mostly I think it was teachers. But they used this phrase, "You are wise beyond your years." Have you ever heard that phrase? You might have used that. And it usually comes from, I think, older people. That's who I usually hear it from. And so that's just who I connect that with. But they say, you are wise beyond your years. And when you're studying for this lesson and you're thinking about Solomon, you can't think about Solomon without thinking about wisdom. As much as I would like to say that wisdom that I had when I was maybe this tall, and that wisdom that people saw in me, as much as I would like to say that wisdom came from me, and that I was able to acquire that wisdom on my own, I think if I actually thought a little bit more about it, I believe that wisdom actually came from God's Word. How to treat people, how to love other people, how to respect authority, where I need to place value in life. Do I need to place it in getting money and getting loaded? No, I place it in God. And how I treat other people and how I think of myself and how I live and how I commit myself to my work. As much as I would like to say all that came from me and I invented it, it came from there. Proverbs chapter 1 verse 7, we're talking about Solomon tonight. That's in his area of expertise. Proverbs chapter 1 verse 7 says, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge." And he talks about even later on, the fear of the Lord, it produces wisdom. It produces understanding. And what we find in his life, and we'll talk about more so of kind of how he's described in 1 Kings and also in 2 Chronicles. But in his life, when we read about it, it seems like very short, but he's written so much more and said so many more things that we can learn from. But when we look at his life, he tells us something that's very important. Wisdom comes from God. Don't go after any other person. Don't go after these life coaches that are very prevalent today, these life coaches who have the inside access. Guess what? Solomon would say in Ecclesiastes chapter 1, they're coming up with nothing new. There's nothing new under the sun. When we look at the world and everything that's happened, everything that will happen, everybody's just repeating themselves and finding new ways to say the same exact thing. He says, look to God, because that's where wisdom comes from. I wanted to introduce that because I think that's what we need to keep in mind when we talk about just the few points we're going to study in Solomon's life. We're not going to really go Ecclesiastes, Proverbs, Song of Solomon heavy tonight. We're going to really just look at how 1 Kings describes his life and what he had done. I think the first thing that we can learn from King Solomon is that Solomon was very inadequate in the beginning. You think sometimes, we know about the prayer. We know about the prayer. God appears to him and, appears to him and says, hey, what do you want? Ask anything. I'll give it to you. And Solomon says, I want wisdom. And God says, well, because you didn't ask for, riches or long life or the lives of your enemies, just because you didn't ask for all those things and you asked for wisdom, I'm going to bless you with all of these other things. And we think about that and we don't really think about why he asked for wisdom. What prompted him to ask for wisdom? In 1 Kings chapter 1, David is very old, and David is Solomon's father, King David. And there's a man by the name of Adonijah that shows up. And God had already promised in 2 Samuel chapter 7, the book before 1 Kings, God had already promised David it's going to be Solomon who is going to be put on the throne. And David even agreed and told Solomon this. This is what is going to happen. Solomon will succeed me as king over Israel. And in 1 Kings chapter 1, well, what happens? A man by the name of Adonijah comes and claims the throne for himself. He claims the throne for himself. And the man Nathan, the prophet, you remember Nathan the prophet? And then also Bathsheba. They hear of this and they get very upset. And David is so old now, he really can't get out of bed. He's at the point of death. And you could see the conflict here. You have somebody who's claiming, I am a son of David. I am a son of the king. I'm the rightful heir of the throne. And he's sacrificing, he's celebrating, he's telling everybody this. This is getting so much news coverage. And everybody's following after Adonijah, but Solomon's the one who's supposed to be on the throne, and David is about to die. He is the only one who can set this straight. And so there is an urgency. And I want you to realize in 1 Kings chapter 1, who it is who goes to David and reminds David of what God promised and what David was committed to do. It's not Solomon who goes to David. It's mom who goes to David. And it's also Nathan who goes to David. Not Solomon, not the one who's assertive, not the one who's, knows everything, and not the one who's all wise. Absolutely not. This is before he prayed for that. It's Bathsheba who goes in. Something really interesting there is that we think about King Solomon, we think about wisdom, but we may forget at times at the beginning of his ruling, at the very beginning, it was mom who was speaking for him. It wasn't him. And then we go on to chapter 3, after David had died and after he is basically told on his deathbed what he wants for Solomon, for King Solomon. He says, this is what I want you to do. And he lays out all these things. He says, remember so-and-so because he treated me ill. Do not let him go down to the grave in peace. And then he talks about another person. He says, make sure that he eats at your table because he was kind to me. He was with me. And so we look at verse 3. It says, after all that, it says, Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of David his father, but only he sacrificed and made offerings at the high places. And the king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the great high place. And Solomon used to offer 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. At Gibeon the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, ask what I shall give you. And Solomon said, you have shown great and steadfast love to your servant David my father, because he walked before you in faithfulness and righteousness and in uprightness of heart toward you. And you have kept for him this great and steadfast love and have given him a son to sit on his throne this day. And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of David my father. Although I am but a little child, I do not know how to go out or come in. And your servant is in the midst of your people who you have chosen, a great people, too many to be numbered or counted for multitude. Give your servant therefore an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to govern this your great people? What prompted him to ask for wisdom? Let me paraphrase. God, I'm scared. I feel inadequate. I feel like I'm too young. I'm a youth. Like this is a big boy job. This is an adult job. You have to have a belt to do this job. I mean, you have to have experience. I don't know. I don't have a dad here to help me with this job, to walk me through this and to show me. I don't have. And then, by the way, God, I'm following after King David. It's not like I'm following after Saul, who did a bunch of bad stuff and then failed as a king. I'm following after King David, the role model, the standard, the one that everybody loved, the one that conquered nations, the one who did great things and made very few mistakes. Just think about the pressure. Think about the pressure for him to be adequate, to be competent, to go in there, and then the expectations of the people. Oh, this is David's son. He's going to be just like David. He's going to do things just like David. He's going to be great just like David. You know, Joey probably even knows, preachers may be even held to this expectation sometimes. A preacher leaves and another preacher comes in, maybe a young preacher or an older preacher comes in, and guess what? The congregation expects that preacher to be just like the last one, because that's what you're used to. And what is Israel probably thinking? They're related, so, he should be really good at it. He should know what to do. He's worried. He's anxious. He's a little fearful. He doesn't ask for wisdom because he says, God, I'm already strong, but I feel like I just need that extra boost of wisdom. I feel already competent to do this job, but I just need that extra boost. I just need just a little bit more so that I can be really good at this job. He says, no, God, I have no idea what I'm doing. Please give me wisdom to judge what's right, to judge what's evil, to judge what's good. I want us to think about this because there's a lot we can learn. Who did Solomon go to? God actually came to him, but he didn't ask for riches. That's later in that text. He doesn't ask for riches. He doesn't ask for long life. He doesn't ask for the life of his enemies. He doesn't ask for all those things that really don't matter. He asked for something that mattered. Something that would help him gain riches. Something that would help him to live a long and prosperous life. That's what the book of Proverbs talks about. If you are wise, if you are knowledgeable and understanding, guess what? You can have a long and prosperous life in the land. And he asked for wisdom. He didn't ask for the fish. He asked for the rod and reel to catch the fish. I want you to think about your walk right now with God. Are there things that you're afraid to do as a Christian? Are there things that you feel inadequate right now to do as a Christian? What things in your life, if Joey or the elders here would ask you, could you do this? Could you try this? We need a service and we need you to head this up. We need you to do this. We need you to make sure that this person feels like they are welcome the next time they come here. Can you go and visit the list is endless. Here's the question. Is fear and feelings of inadequacy a good enough excuse to not grow? Absolutely not. I just don't feel like I'm qualified. I don't feel adequate enough. I don't think I'm competent in that arena. I'm just worried that I might say something. You see where this is going? That's fear talking. It's fear talking, and I want you to see what Solomon did about his fear. He went to God about it. Go to James. Go to James chapter 1, starting in verse 5. And James tells us something that I'm sure that you already know, but we need to go back and revisit it again because that's the way the Christian life works. We have to continue to reflect on the promises of God and what the Bible says. But in James chapter 1, he begins by saying this: if any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. But let him ask in faith with no doubting. For the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. I want you to see, where do you go for wisdom? You go to God for wisdom. Where do you go for food? I go to, grocery store. I'll go to the kitchen. Where do you go if you want to learn, if you have a grandparent or dad or something like this who's good with cars? Where do you want to go to learn how to work on a car? You go to them. Guess what? If you want to know how to be wise, and if you want wisdom, where are you going to go? God. Now here's the question. In those fears that you have as a Christian, have you ever asked God to help you to be wise to succeed in that arena of your life? How often in your prayers do you say the words, wisdom? Help me to be wise, God. God, I need more wisdom right now. God, there is something coming in my life that I don't think that I can handle, and I need your help. You realize God is the God of truth. He knows all truth. Anything that He says is going to be true. He knows what will happen, what has happened. He knows every little secret thing. He is the library of the universe. He knows all things. He is where you can go to learn any answer, to find anything. And what's really sad is that when we get to those points in life where we don't know what to do, we go somewhere else rather than going to the one who knows all things. We go to somewhere else to find wisdom, to find how to handle this situation, and we never pray to God and say, God, I would like to invite you on this journey to solve this problem. A lot of people are scared to get married because maybe they didn't have that marriage in their life, their mother or father or somebody who they were related to see what love truly looked like. And they're afraid. They feel inadequate. They're scared to say I do because they're afraid that they're going to fail a few years down the road. Some people are afraid to have children because it's just a big responsibility. You're responsible for a human life that's highly 100% dependent on you, especially in the first few years. People are afraid to have a Bible study with someone because they've never done it before. And because they've never done it before, they have no experience, just like Solomon. I've never been king before, God. I don't know how this works. Where does wisdom come from? Above. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And if you are allowing fear, if I am allowing fear to keep me from doing certain deeds that are good deeds and deeds of service and to further the kingdom of God, and I'm not willing to ask God for wisdom, I can see why I wouldn't want to do it. Because you will fail, and I will fail. If we want to do the Lord's work, we need to invite Him along the way and to also help us knowing how to do those things. Coming up in a few weeks, Joey mentions I'm at the New Hope Church of Christ. Coming up in a few weeks, it will be my first year there, full year. And I'm not going to tell you any specifics or anything like that. But I just want you to know that there are some things that happened this year that I never expected to happen to me in my first year of preaching. And I felt a lot like Solomon. And I did not have answers to so many questions, and that bothered me. But I made it through the year, and those people made it through the year. And I believe with all my heart that it was because of my prayer for wisdom every night that actually helped me through those situations. If your life is like juggling, family, work, social life, church, religious, spiritual matters, if you feel like you are always juggling those things and you can never keep them up in the air, I would suggest going to God and asking for wisdom. Because He is the giver of it. And then James says, it's for free. Just believe that He will give it to you. The first thing that we learn is that Solomon turned his inadequacy into trusting God. And God was able to help him through his kingship. The next thing I think we need to talk about is actually in the same chapter, but it's really interesting because sometimes we may not realize this, but in verse 16 of chapter 3, we get this example. After he prays the prayer, and then God says, I'm going to grant you wisdom, and then all these other things I'm going to give to you, we see an example of his wisdom. And so let's read that together. It says, verse 16, "Then two prostitutes came to the king and stood before him. The one woman said, 'O my lord, this woman and I live in the same house, and I gave birth to a child while she was in the house. Then on the third day after I gave birth, this woman also gave birth, and we were alone. There was no one else with us in the house. Only we two were in the house. And this woman's son died in the night because she lay on him. And she arose at midnight and took my son from beside me while your servant slept, and laid him at her breast, and laid her dead son on my breast. When I rose in the morning to nurse my child, behold, he was dead. But when I looked at him closely in the morning, behold, he was not the child that I had born. But the other woman said, No, the living child is mine, and the dead child is yours. And the first said, No, the dead child is yours, and the living child is mine. Thus they spoke before the king. And the king said, The one says, This is my son that is alive, and your son is dead. And the other says, No, but your son is dead, and my son is the living one. And the king said, Bring me a sword. So a sword was brought before the king. And the king said, Divide the living child in two, and give half to the one and half to the other. Then the woman whose son was alive said to the king, because her heart yearned for her son, O my lord, give her the living child, and by no means put him to death. But the other said, He shall be neither mine nor yours, divide him. And the king answered and said, Give the living child to the first woman, and by no means put him to death. She is his mother. And all Israel heard of the judgment that the king had rendered, and they stood in awe of the king because they perceived that the wisdom of God was in him to do justice. What did we just read? Well, I think we just read about the beauty and the power of wisdom. What did Solomon do? First off, it's two women, but it's not only two women. Some translations will say it's a harlot or two prostitutes. What king would listen to two prostitutes? He asked for God wisdom, and he says, I want to do what's right. Wisdom helps him do what's right and what's pleasing in the sight of God. And guess what he is doing? The wise king, the good king, is listening even to prostitutes. And then not only that, there's no witnesses. There are no witnesses here. And does that mean that Solomon says, you need to just go your own way because there are no witnesses here to substantiate this evidence? No. He's wise enough to figure it out. And then the last thing is, he doesn't make a rash decision. After they say their case and then she argues back and she argues back, he doesn't just make a decision then. No, he waits for adequate evidence. And that adequate evidence was bringing a sword and saying, I'm going to kill this child. I'm going to divide it in half, and you can have half, and you can have the other half. And the mother says, no, just give it to her. And he confirmed who the mother was. It shows his wisdom. It's very powerful. But another instance in this text is actually in chapter 10 of 1 Kings. Another example of Solomon's wisdom, and I think this is just amazing. But starting in verse 1 of chapter 10, there's a queen who comes to see him. Verse 1, it says, Now when the queen of Sheba heard of the fame of Solomon concerning the name of the Lord, she came to test him with hard questions. She came to Jerusalem with a very great retinue, with camels bearing spices and very much gold and precious stones. And when she came to Solomon, she told him all that was on her mind. And Solomon answered all her questions. There was nothing hidden from the king that he could not explain to her. And when the queen of Sheba had seen all the wisdom of Solomon, the house that he had built, the food of his table, the seating of his officials, and the attendance of his servants, their clothing, his cupbearers, and his burnt offerings that he offered at the house of the Lord, there was no more breath in her. Let's stop right there and just think. How many questions did she ask? All of them. And this isn't just any regular civilian. This is a queen, so she has seen some very difficult dilemmas. She's seen all the different conflicts that have caused her to stay up at night. She's seen all the different cases that were just unsolvable. And she comes and she brings all of those to Solomon. And how many is he able to answer? All of them. It says nothing was hidden from her. No answer was hidden from her. He knew every single thing. And not only that, but later it says she saw his house. She saw all of his servants and everything, the cups that he would even drink out of, and his house. And what did she see? What did she say? It's breathtaking. It says there is no more breath in her, verse 5. It was breathtaking how wise he was. I think about what we're going to ask God in heaven. Think about all those questions. And I just want to appreciate God right now, because if Solomon was able to answer all of these questions, how much more the God who gives this wisdom will be able to answer all of our questions. Help us to understand all of those things that maybe made us scared or caused doubts. But Solomon was wise. He was wise with the 2 prostitutes, and then he was also wise, showing that even from the lowest, the prostitutes, but then also to the highest of status, the queen of Sheba, and a woman who brought at least around 9,000 pounds of gold to him after this. He was wise. But wisdom, here's the point, does not equal righteousness. Wisdom does not equal righteousness. It's very sad that we turn to chapter 11 of this passage. It says in verse 1, "Now King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh, Moabite, Ammonite, Edomite, Sidonian, and Hittite women from the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the people of Israel, 'You shall not enter into marriage with them, neither shall they with you, for surely they will turn away your heart after their gods.' And Solomon clung to these in love." What the Bible is actually quoting here is Deuteronomy chapter 7, verses 1 through 4, where God is talking to the Israelite people and saying, when you go into this land, this is what you are not going to do. Do not marry the foreign women. Why? Is it because they're a different skin color? Is it because, they're different nationalities? Is it because they're from, different backgrounds? There's a cultural difference? No. It's because they serve different gods. And if you bring those gods into your house, you'll be tempted every day, and you'll probably follow after them. Does this happen with Solomon? Verse 3, it says, he had 700 wives who were princesses and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. For when Solomon was old, his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. For Solomon went after Ashtoreth, the goddess of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. So Solomon did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and did not wholly follow the Lord, as David his father had done. And Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and for Molech, the abomination of the Ammonites, on the mountain east of Jerusalem. And so he did for all his foreign wives, who made offerings and sacrificed to their gods. I just want to stop for a minute and just be human with you and give you some honest impression from this. He had so many wives that he could go for about 2 years and spend the day with each one of them. And after about 2 years, he would repeat the cycle. And then you add 300 concubines with that. That's 1,000. 1,000 women. The wise king, the one who asked for wisdom. By the way, if you're thinking about, if you're a parent, I want you to realize something. David was Solomon's dad. And David probably did a fairly good job of raising Solomon. And I wonder how David would have felt knowing that Solomon had the choice of asking for anything from God, and Solomon asked for wisdom to be a good king. How proud he would be. But I want you to realize that even the wisest man who ever lived outside of Jesus, that wisest man was able to have his heart turned away from God. Have you ever heard parents say, I don't know what I did wrong with my child because they turned away from the faith? Have you ever heard about that? I have. That's really sad, isn't it? The answer is this. You can train up your child. That's a general truth. You can train up your child in the way that he or she should go. Yes, that's a general truth. But in the end, it's not the parent's choice where they go. It's theirs. And here we have the wisest man, wisest king. And he was still willing to turn away. He knew all the answers. But knowing all the answers doesn't mean that you stay faithful to God. Turn to Matthew 7. I asked Joey previously, if y'all were having VBS. We're actually having VBS right now at New Hope. They'll start very soon. And we've got a senior in high school who's going to fill in for me, and I'm really excited for him. But in Matthew chapter 7, that song that we sing at VBS about the wise man and the foolish man, when we look at Matthew 7, that's the end of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, isn't it? And starting in verse 24, I just want you to read this with me and have Solomon in the back of your mind while we're reading this. Verse 24, everyone then who hears these words of mine, this is Jesus speaking, and does them will be like a wise man who built his house on the rock. And the rain fell and the floods came and the winds blew and beat on that house, but it did not fall because it had been founded on the rock. And everyone who hears these words of mine and does not do them will be like a foolish man who built his house on the sand. And the rain fell and the floods came and the wind blew and beat against that house. And it fell. Great was the fall of it. I want to ask you a question. We sing that song. I want to ask you a question. What made the difference between the wise man and the foolish man? I want you to think about that. Was it knowledge? Go back and read it again. Everyone who hears these words, verse 24. And then verse 26, it says, and everyone who hears these words, both of them knew what to do. The wise man and the foolish man knew exactly what God wanted him or her to do. It's not the fools are over here and they're just like, we have no idea. We're just ignorant. We don't know what to do. That's not the way it is. And the wise over here, they say, yeah, we got all the answers because we studied, we learned. That's not it. Jesus says there will be wise people and foolish people, and knowledge is not going to separate them. It's not going to be knowledge. What's it going to be? The one who does what they know what is right. What they know is right. Solomon knew what was right, didn't he? He knew it. He was the wisest one who ever lived outside of Jesus. He was wise. But wisdom doesn't keep you 100% from sin. You have to practice it. When we look at this and we read about the ones here who have heard these words and the fools who've heard the words, what separates them is behavior. What are you going to do with the knowledge that you have? Are you going to use it? Or are you going to bury it somewhere and treat it as if it's not significant at all? Think about the illustration of the mother and her daughter, her young daughter, going to visit someone who's been absent for a while from church and hasn't really participated in service and really just hasn't been faithful. And they wanted to go and they wanted to invite her back and to encourage her to come back. And so they enter the house and they sit down at the couch and they're talking. And the mother, who's visiting this woman, says, you know we would love to have you back. And the woman says, I know. And the mother says, and you know what Christians do. We assemble together and we work together. And she says, I know. And she says, and you know that we would accept you back. We would be so thrilled to have you back. And she says, I know. And there's a lull in the conversation, and the daughter speaks up and says, then why don't you come back? And the woman says, I don't know. Isn't it so sad that there are so many people in the world who know what to do, and they never do it? I wonder if there are people in this room who know something that they need to do, but they will not do it because of pride, because of how embarrassing it might be, because of what it might say about their character or things that they've done in the past that they would have to, if they did it, man, this would mean that all the things I've done are just wrong. Or I'll just have to, that's just a life-changing event. I would have to change so much about me. That's the point. God has rulership over your life. He created you. You owe your life to Him. I owe my life to Him. And if we are not willing to act on the knowledge that He has given us, then what does Jesus say about that? Jesus says that's foolish. That's foolish. You can know all the answers, can't you? You can know a lot of answers. You know, I know a fair amount of answers because I've gone and I've studied, but guess what? That says nothing about if I'm right with God or not. I have to live it. And if I'm not willing to act on it, if I'm like Solomon, and Solomon who's all wise and knows these things, but gives himself over to other gods, I'm not wise. I'm acting against God. The plea is the knowledge and the wisdom that God has blessed you with. Use it. Use it. Or else it's useless. The last thing that we can study about Solomon and really learn from him is that the wisest man, he has insight. He has insight on many things. I'm going to stop real soon. But he has insight. In Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verses 10 and 11, I'll summarize. In chapters 10 and 11, he says, I've given my heart to anything, pleasure, money, fame, all these different things. I was able to have all those things. I didn't keep myself from anything. And guess what? In the end, it was meaningless. It led to nothing. It never led to anything that was meaningful. And so we see this person who has so much experience in life. He has so much experience in all things. But guess what? He's also wise. He's also wise and can really think about those experiences. And this wise person who's experienced just about everything says, don't follow after what I did. Don't do that. But what does he say at the end of Ecclesiastes? Fear God and keep His commandments. This is man's all. This is the whole duty of man. This is what will lead to actually true meaning. It's not in money. It's not in getting more money. Money will not make you happy forever. Someday it will all be taken away. That's called death. Even relationships with other people. I'm sorry, but those end too. Solomon teaches us that meaning, true meaning, is found in God. And you can't have it anywhere else. I'm sorry. I can't have it anywhere else. I have to find it in God. Let's pray real quick. Dear God, we thank you for Solomon and his example. And God, we ask that we learn so much from him. We love you so much, and we ask that this lesson tonight has been honorable and has been helpful and helps others to grow. We ask for forgiveness of sins and that you bless this church. In Jesus' name, amen.